It's good to see everybody. I see some familiar faces and some new folks. That's always a perfect balance. I hope everyone's doing well. Summer is upon us. It feels unstable to me. It's not really clear. Where are we? Or is it? Are we all getting sick now? Or are we all traveling? Is reality back? Did it ever leave? Is it ever going to come back? And then I have some, stuff in my family, dad, nothing too bad, but it's just that weird kind of unsettled sense of things going on. And so as usual, I'll talk for a bit and we'll do a practice and then open it up for conversation. And I didn't prepare too much. I have an idea of what to do for the practice. In a way, it's a theme that I've come back to in many of these sessions, and it's in my work in general, which is basically, you could call it inquiry practice, and maybe it's worth thinking about that term for a little bit. There was a period in my life where I practiced with a very interesting teacher who had a very informal style. There wasn't like a formal meditation practice or any kind of ritual or any kind of body work or any kind of like revealed dogma. He really just sort of had a sort of way of talking. And he had gone through a lot of Hindu stuff and meditation stuff and had met an Ayurvedic teacher who had this style of talking really that he called inquiry. And it's a sort of an interesting thing to think about it. Part of it involves the thing that I'm most thinking about right now for this class and also lately, which is just questioning and how you bring questions, how you sit with questions, both in terms of actually meditating with questions, verbal questions that you allow to deeply resonate and not necessarily answer, or if you answer, you instantly kind of steamroller them with another question. But the idea, I can put that practice into this larger question of inquiry, which is like, how do we think about what we're looking for when we do spiritual practice, when we seek? And it doesn't have to be spiritual. I mean, it can be something like, finding your limits physically, or, putting yourself in a situation that you've never done before, something you resist. And, that kind of desire to expand or move beyond or come to another perspective, which is, often coupled with a certain restlessness or a dissatisfaction, if we're honest, with the way things are, the way our minds are, the way our world is perceived. And so we have this kind of idea of seeking, which can, of course, be its own trap. But one thing I really, some people say like, well, the problem with seeking is that as you've, a lot of spiritual traditions will teach you that part of what you're really aiming for is to stop seeking because there's nothing to look for. It's right here, whatever that means. It's in awareness now. It's in this moment. There's nowhere else to go. You don't have to change yourself. You don't have to become a different kind of person. You might want to play with your circumstance and see what happens if you do this, see what happens if you stop doing that. It's not about not doing anything, but there's a real strong difference between the seeker who's looking for the truth or looking for the guru, and especially in the earlier, kind of the psychedelic era that influenced me as a young person growing up, because it was kind of the model of the people who came before. Like a lot of those people were really on these searches and they were going to, places that were hard to go to then. It was hard to go to India in 1970, and then you'd find a guru and you'd go be in a cave somewhere. And that kind of intense seeking had a drive to it that I think now is less applicable for a lot of us, partly because those ways have been mapped and we see some of the problems in them. And it's also that there's so much, kind of coming our way, that the whole idea of seeking has changed. And again, there's a way that you can get trapped in seeking, like you always want something more. I mean, when I was younger, it would be like, what's the next teaching or the next book or the next guru or whatever. And I wasn't ever like a super big spiritual seeker that way. And I tended to stick with things that I liked, rather than restlessly move around. But that one way. But so what I'm leading up to a way of reframing the process of seeking in this idea of inquiry, of questioning, because the act of questioning releases you from the frame, whatever the frame is. And it doesn't necessarily, in fact, the deeper questions don't really deliver an answer, or rather they are answered in ways that you're not anticipating, and that don't take the form of like some verbal answer. Like if you who am I? Well, it's not that there's not an answer. It's not that that question can't motivate profound experience that has a quality of revelation or insight that then gives you a glimpse, a way of moving forward, but it doesn't really happen through some verbal response, like who am I? I am an eternal soul. Or who am I? I am the product of all of my experiences and my ancestral line. Who am I? I am a construct. Who am I? I am a shard of light. These are all fine answers, but that's not really what it's about in a way. So there's a way in which we can start to really use the framework of questioning as a way of reframing disappointment and dissatisfaction and restlessness in a more productive way, without denying the fact that we don't know what's going on, or that we're not there yet, or that we're not totally happy where we are, or something like that. And so what I mean is like, there can be a sense of restlessness, which is fine, a sense of dissatisfaction, which of course drives us to do things. I'm dissatisfied with how my body feels, so I commit to a workout practice, and through that I discover new energies and new ways of being in the body. And so it's there's nothing wrong with that kind of dissatisfaction, but there can be an edge to it of kind of negativity, or a kind of habit of being dissatisfied. And there's a way of taking that kind of restlessness or dissatisfaction, and you say, okay, this is a question that I'm sort of misinterpreting, or I'm thinking of it only as dissatisfaction. And really what it is that I still don't know what it is, or who am I, or where am I going? And so you can use the way that questions both motivate you, and they don't give you an easy answer a lot of the time. And it becomes, in a way, a whole mode of being in the world, of relating to your own decisions, of relating to other people, relating to teachers. And it also helps avoid some of the traps of spiritual seeking. One I'm thinking of here is the fact that it's very easy to become influenced and sort of drawn into the orbit of certain kinds of people who present themselves as knowing the answers. And, I always got to say this, I have a teacher. It's actually a fairly traditional relationship. I'm the student, he's the teacher. It's not like some peer-to-peer thing, although most of my life has been like that. I haven't had a lot of teachers in my life, but I have had a few. So I want to, while I have a great deal to say about this sort of peer-to-peer idea, which is kind of what we're doing here. I mean, in a way, I'm the teacher. I talk for a while. I lead the meditation. I motivate the conversation. I'm also, quite intentionally, constantly kind of giving it away and bringing it back to this not knowing and this we're in it all together. We're all in the leaky boat. We're all bailing water out of the leaky boat. We can't see beyond the horizon. There's some camaraderie. Sometimes people have to take the lead on certain tasks. But as soon as it gets congealed and then there's a leader, I'm the one who's going to save the boat by all should follow me. Then I'm like, no. This is not where we're going. This is not the nature of the leaky boat we're in right now. So I have I'm very cautious about authority, although I recognize the value of the structure of the teacher and the teacher-student relationship. So how does inquiry help this situation? You bring your questions to the teacher and you just keep asking them. They're like, well, this, da-da-da. And you're like, well, what about this? And you can do that in sort of a punk way, like where you're always asking the questions, there's someone has a whole shtick and they give it and you can see the gap or there's like a problem or a contradiction they haven't really identified. And you can always just point out that stuff. So you can be kind of annoying about it. We all know that style. It's kind of, it has its place, at least in my life, my experience. But it's not really about that. It's really about recognizing that the question kind of continues, and that when you're not answering, to my mind, if you're not asking questions like that, there's a certain dullness that enters in. And maybe for people who find themselves on a very devotional path, it's important at some point to not have any doubt and not have any skepticism, and I can't really judge that. Like that's not really my style. I've been around people who have gone through periods where they were devotees and they were totally in it. When they're in it, you're in it. And that's, part of, in a way, goes in a slightly different direction, but I feel called to say it, is that part of what goes along with inquiry is not just asking questions and not just reframing doubt or disappointment or restlessness as something more positive, but it's also like the inquiry of experiment. Because you can do something in the mode of belief and you can do the same thing in the mode of experiment. So whatever, I'm attracted to a teacher. They have a weekend and I go to this and I can tell like she's got all these devotees and they're all super into her. And then there's like this kind of intense practice. And I'm like, whoa, this is a little bit more than I signed up for. I can approach that maybe in the situation of experiment. So it's not about just reifying my skepticism and staying out of it and being like, okay, show me something. Or like, I don't know, it seems a little weird. If I really trust myself, I'm like, okay, I'm going to throw myself into this. Knowingly, see where it goes, what happens. It's not going to kill me, or it's unlikely to. It's not unlikely to turn me into a cult zombie. I'm going to trust my own ability to ask questions to give me a little room to maneuver, even in a weird scene. So inquiry is not just about asking questions or being like again, being skeptical, but also approaching your life, approaching practice, approaching other people in a mode of experimentation, because that's what an experiment is. It's an inquiry. How does the world work? What happens when we do this? What happens when, you take a psychedelic in a group situation where there's a heavy devotional vibe, like some ayahuasca circles you might check out. You go there and you're like, oh man, everybody's in white. They all have that vibe, where it's very kind of clean and there's like this sort of integrity and the softness that's also a little bit, like it's got an idea about what it's doing. And you're like, well, what do I do with that? Like, it's not my style, but like, let's go with it. What happens? What's the worst that can happen? Well, there can be things that are bad that happen, but that's part of what experiment is that it's a risk. It's a question. And like, that's what I'm saying is there's a mode of questioning that takes you out of the situation because you're doubting everything and you're reifying I'm not buying it. I don't know. I don't think this thing, nah, I don't know. I don't trust, da, da, da. That's a way of asking questions that doesn't threaten yourself, doesn't open up the possibilities for something to change. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about what if we go into this? Like, what? Well, what about that? What about that? What about that? So I'm sort of playing with this questioning both as a way of understanding and transforming your own doubt, your own skepticism, your own restlessness, your own disappointment into something a little bit more active. So that's sort of on your personality side. Then it also has this kind of interpersonal quality where it's almost an avenue to experiment with things, because you're there as someone inquiring, not as someone believing or as someone turning over your power, but you're really asking the question, meaning like, what is it to devote yourself? Or what is it to throw yourself into a practice that has an ecstatic dimension that you're not in control? What is it to let go of control in certain circumstances? What does it mean? What is it like for me? So it allows you to kind of navigate that. But there's a deeper level, that has a few aspects to it that maybe I'll touch on or we can talk about later, which is the possibility that in our quest, in our self-discovery, in our investigation into the world, in our attempt to wake up, what we wake up to is really basically what the fuck. That the thing itself has the quality of a question or a conundrum or a strange loop, or in traditional Buddhist language, a koan. And in Zen, there's a lot of kind of some sort of misperceptions about koans if you're not a Zen practitioner, and even if you are, and not to say that I'm an expert in it by any means, but it's definitely different to practice with them in a traditional situation than to either read about them and think about them, or certainly the ideas that a lot of people have about them, that there are these sort of puzzles that challenge the rational. And it's true. It's true. I mean, one of the things is a lot of them actually have answers. They're not like, unanswerable questions. They're answers. I mean, they're not like direct answers, but they are answers which are attempting to sort of demonstrate certain aspects of the problem. But in a way, there's really just one koan, which is sitting with what the fuck, and how you get there, and then all the ways that you put something between you and that are part of the process of doing it, and why you do it kind of over and over again. And, and the what the fuck is your what the fuck. That's the thing. It's not like some abstract idea. Well, we can never really know. Well, no, that's not it. It's not only that I can never really know, I am not knowing. Like, that's the thing. And that's, that can take the form of an experience of an awakeness. It can be very subtle, where like, I don't know what this is, but it's marvelous, and I'm just going to go with it. Or it can be really existential. Like, wait, lately I've been having this kind of wonderful lightness now and again, where like I don't know how to say it exactly, where the unfolding of the moment, my awareness of the unfolding of the particular moment with all the events, just right here, sitting here, talking to you with the screen and the light in my face and all that, that there's nothing really from some perspective, a phenomenological perspective that is more and more available to me. There is nothing behind it or under it, supporting it. It's not really going anywhere, even though it's changing. It's like a kind of froth that has a logic. If I follow the story, oh yeah, there's causality. I do this and then this happens. It's not like it's just crazy, but it doesn't rest on anything. In a way, that's sort of like the question. It's like a question. Well, what, you want it to be somewhere? You want it to be resting on some other thing? It's like the turtle's all the way down. It's like, well, no, I just want the next turtle. Well, okay, no, the turtle beneath that one. And in a way, like the turtle's all the way down, that's the model of the questioning. And so in one version, each question is another turtle. Okay, this thing is arising. Well, why is it arising? Oh, because of karma. Well, why is there karma? Okay, well, because of action. Why is there act? You just keep going and keep going and keep going. And at some point you get exhausted, or something happens, or there's a revelatory moment, and that's one of the reasons you do koans, because while there are subtle forms of changing yourself in relationship to the big WTF, that process of exposing yourself and asking those kinds of questions also sets you up for certain kinds of, flashes, certain kinds of insights, which aren't the point, but they do, sometimes I feel like these moments of like a really deep meditation, but even more like one where like something shifts, or like the wall, the bottom falls out of the bucket, and or you're in free fall, or it all comes together for a moment, or whatever, those kinds of things. Those aren't answers. I guess some people think they're answers, make them into answers, but the person on the path of inquiry would say that these are just other insights or other ways of experiencing the conundrum, and also that they're like little treats to keep you going. There's one version, I think it's even in a sutta, somebody knows, feel free to correct me, that, as some of there's this style of meditating associated with, traditional Theravada that involves the jhanas, which are these stages of absorption. And so you generate more and more focus and concentration by sort of absorbing your attention into a single object that eventually begins to kind of circulate and produce these states, which on the near side are very pleasurable, and then on the far side get super far out, like super, like neither here nor not, there's neither something here nor nothing here, or there's no space anymore, like it gets super far out. But on the near side, they're just really, really pleasurable. And one of the reasons to meditate is because you do it long enough, and with a little bit of luck, you can actually have a lot of pleasure. And pleasure and insight together kind of, or not pleasure, but sort of energy and insight together kind of frame these sorts of openings that we can have. In Zen, you call them kensho, but the word opening is a great one, I think. But in a way, they're like treats. Like this gives you some yumminess to fortify you to be able to really look at, in a Buddhist sense, emptiness, or really look at what it means that it's just turtles, or it's just what the fuck. Like, to really take that on is actually has some harrowing aspects. And part of another dimension of the questioner, of of inquiry is you're kind of embracing a certain lack of stability and a certain kind of willingness or openness to the void, because part of what the void is no answers, but you still are asking questions. It's one thing to say, okay, there's no answers, forget it, I'm just going to do drugs and party and watch TV and, whatever. Well, if you could pull that off, great. But for a lot of us, it just doesn't work. And we are questioning again, knowing that our questions are just sort of setting us up for some void encounter, which might, be full of love, but it might not be. Or one time it is and one time it's not. And honing and refining the art of not just formulating questions or interacting with the world through questions, but being a question is actually, it gives you like a little vector to ride in the void. And I haven't talked about high dose psychedelics, but I'm kind of talking about high dose psychedelics too. And everybody has different experiences. It's a whole menagerie of worlds and possibilities out there. You don't want to generalize ever. You don't want to make it seem that there's some deeper message, because in a way that's part of the trap. Because I think that one of the great things about psychedelics, and particularly larger doses, is that there you are, you're in the what the fuck? What? Are you kidding? No way. No way. And then you're like, what do you do with that? Is it fun? Is it terrifying? Can you handle it? Does it start to actually eat away at the you, and then it's getting a little much and you got to like protect yourself or release into something even deeper? And then sometimes wonderful things happen and you feel loved and held by the universe and you don't have to like freak out. But there's definitely a sort of, void walking along the way. And then, and that also connects, I think it's something we see more obviously with psychedelics that, people talk about a fair amount, is the relationship to the generation of wonder or awe. And wonder and awe are, they're funny emotions. Let's say they're not quite the same thing, but let's just stay with wonder. Big wonder, big capital W wonder. Wow. That it's kind of like the emotional twin of the question. It's wonderment. What is this? I don't know, but it's in its not knowability, there's something awesome in it. And there's something delightful and fascinating in it. And I feel that. And in feeling this quality of wonder, I'm actually able to sort of be with the question, or be with the too muchness, or be with the inscrutability, or be with the immensity, or the complexity, or the chaos. So it gives us a kind of way in that isn't an answer cognitively, and it isn't even necessarily a sense of like, it doesn't have the sense of support necessarily that, say, deep cosmic love can, where you're really in the love vibe and the universe is love and you're the universe, da da da. Wonder still has this kind of edgy, or this kind of opening, a little bit of fear in it. Even we talk about the sublime, the classic aesthetic language of the difference between the beautiful and the sublime. And, in a way you could almost think about, that's almost like two orientations that people have towards their psychedelic experiences. Some people are like going for the beauty, just the love and the juice and the cool lights and the patterns and just that yumminess. And then there's another mode where you're like, well, I'm actually going for the sublime. And there's something potentially terrifying in the sublime, but also something awesome and wonderful. And I guess what I'm saying is that that's, in a way, a richer, more kind of aesthetically open way of understanding and working with this path of questions, or this path of inquiry, is that it's allowing and opening up to a sublimity that is also right here, because those questions are right here. You know, is this room really outside of me? Is this just a model that my brain is kind of producing on the fly based on its own history and cultural codes and biologically programmed perceptual templates? I mean, it really could be that reality itself is like really different than this, you know, and it's really, well, so what do I do with that? Do I sit there and ponder it? Can I use it as a goad? Because questions can be a goad. Go farther, go farther, go farther, go farther. And in that going farther, something happens, something opens, where it doesn't necessarily even matter anymore, like whether I answer that question, because I can throw all the science I want at any question. I can have amazing explanations, a huge stack of explanations that goes many, many stories up in the best language possible with all the greatest proofs possible. And I'm still, I believe, you're still in what the fuck, because it comes down. It's like I talked to my grandfather once. He was like, he was in his 80s and he was a funny guy. He had a very dry sense of humor. And we had an amusing relationship. We'd kind of like rib each other a lot. And he would tell shaggy dog stories. I don't know if you guys know what a shaggy dog story was. I'm not going to inflict one on you, but if you've ever, it's a good thing at least once in your life to have a true, like, good half-hour shaggy dog story inflicted on you. So he was a master of the shaggy dog story. Anyway, he said, this is a guy who's never read Heidegger, doesn't give a shit, doesn't care about Buddhism, doesn't ask these questions, whatever. And he's just like, but it's just, why is there anything at all? Why is there something and not nothing? And that why, no amount of science is ever going to get that. I don't believe. You could argue against it and say that's a defeatist attitude. I mean, it's an interesting conversation. Maybe we can have that question, because, and maybe I'll kind of wrap it up with this, and then we can do a practice is, I say all this, and I've always had this quality. I kind of romanticized the decision, the question in some sense. Maybe it's because I have a hard time making decisions. So I think it's like maybe something spiritual about it when I'm probably just neurotic. But there is this thing of like, well, how do you be someone who is in the question and proceeds on a path of inquiry when we are also in a scientific world where science does a lot of really awesome stuff, for one thing, although it's a lot of shitty stuff too, but it more than that, it's like, it's clearly got a lot of substance to it, not just as a method, which is probably the best thing about science, but also a kind of spirit. And sometimes I wonder, how does the spirit of science, where you're aiming for explanations and where you're experimenting with the idea that you will produce knowledge and explanations out of your experiments, how does that go along with this kind of commitment to just deepening the question and becoming someone who can hold the question, what in Zen they call the great doubt, and not, it's what they sometimes compare to swallowing a red hot iron ball, like it's that intense. Are these contradictions? I think it could sometimes looks that way. For some people they are. If they're not contradictions, then how do we navigate both? And I know that that's part of the questions that we have at the Alembic, the center that I'm set up with Katie, who's doing all the heavy lifting, and Michael Taft, and an increasingly large crew of interesting characters, is sort of how do you balance that? Or even balance isn't the right word. Integrate side by side. Maybe it's no big deal. Maybe it's just not that hard. You do your work over here. You have your question over there. Nothing is absolute to the path of inquiry. Gives you room to maneuver. So that's, let's see, what do we have? One little comment here. Yeah, I love it. We got Daniel says, I had that wise or something instead of nothing moment when I was 4 years old, still processing it. That's great. My version of that, which I like to bring up, some of you heard me say it before, because some people, it's the same kind of thing. I bet there's somebody out there went like, oh my God, I did that. I was 4 and I go, why is there something and not nothing? Boom. My version was I would go to sleep or I'd go to bed at night and I'd sit there and I'd kind of stare up into the dark and I would just say, the universe is infinite. It goes on forever. And then like that concept with my little mind, like 7-year-old mind, like I could actually experience the paradoxical impossibility of that idea, that it goes on forever. There's no bound, but the boundarylessness was like an active existential fact that felt like vertigo. Like it was like I got high off of it. I was like, okay, I'm going to set it up and it goes on forever. Oh boy, whoa, that was fucking weird. It was something that actually sort of inspired and was like an altered state. And I would do it repeatedly. And then after a while, I can't, it's hard to do because you're so encrusted with God. You're, well, of course, it's a boundaryless condition. Yeah. You see, it's like part of this path of inquiry and this kind of the broad koan of your life, or the koan of existence, is to kind of be back there again, to be back with being for and wise or something and not nothing, and being in that intensity without the left brain sort of trying to package it up again really, really quickly, which is what it's really good at doing. So yeah, thanks for that, Daniel. Okay, let's sit. Yeah. So feel free to turn off your camera. I'm going to leave mine on. We record these and put them on YouTube for you to look at again, and people to stumble into. So find your seat. Allow yourself to settle. And if you're sitting in a chair, if you can, sit forward so you're not leaning against the back of the chair. You really want to have your spine free. And speaking of spine, you'd be great to have your pelvis sort of spilling forward, rotated forward slightly, so you have a nice curve in the lower part of your spine. And you could almost imagine kind of setting up the spine so it sort of blooms, or it rises like some undersea plant or something. And part of that rising and opening up is a slight opening of the chest, shoulders back just a bit. Nothing extreme, although you can go extreme to see what it really feels like when you totally go for it, and then like bring it down, ratchet it down. You just want a nice sense of openness in the chest. And then tucking in your chin slightly to open up the back of the head. And with all these kind of balanced together, while we are aiming for stillness, this is a dynamic kind of stillness. So even though I'll encourage you not to move as much as you can, not to fidget, not to stretch. If you're in pain and you need to move, sure, that's fine. But it's always good to aim for stillness. But the stillness is not static. You can imagine the sitting pose. It's more like a yoga asana. It's a a position that's held. It's not just sitting there like a rock, although sometimes it's good to sit like a rock. But be aware of the dynamics, the tipping forward of the lower spine, the opening of the chest, the balancing quality of tucking in the chin, sort of dance of posture. Just allow yourself to settle into that. Make any little adjustments. All right, we've built a nice frame, and within that structure, we animate it with breath. And what I want you to do is to get in touch with your breath, but really allow it or use it to bring your attention down into your lower belly. One way is to just follow the breath from the nose. And on the exhale, really experience that abdomen resting and opening up. Or you can just bring your attention to the bottom of the belly and allow yourself to feel as if you're breathing in and out from that area. Notice that with the inhale, there's a slight energetic uptick. And with the exhale, there's an invitation to relax a little deeper. And as you ride that relaxation, allow it to settle again at the base of the stomach or a few inches, few fingers below the belly, but don't worry about specific points. We're really just trying to open up the lower center. Second chakra if you want, Dantian if you want, really just the central pivot of our body. So let's enliven and settle into this area with the breath for a few minutes here. If you're distracted, words, images, memories, plans, just let them go and return to the breath and the belly. If this sort of distraction persists, another way of working with it is to tune into the energy, that's the best word I can use at the moment, of the distraction, its distracting quality, its restlessness, its sort of anxiety to move or produce something new happening, and just tune into that and almost own it, swallow it, bring it into the field of your attention. That's too abstract. Just let it go. We're not super focusing on the breath like it's the only thing going on. The breath is an invitation to hold our focus and our energy in an area, but do it in the spirit of experiment. Allow yourself to feel it. What is this feeling like? What's shifting? What's emerging? Not in a way to get more concepts about what you're going through, but allowing yourself to experience and taste and probe along with the practice of returning to the breath. Now, I want to give you a question to throw in here. This is something you'll, verbally in your inner language, your inner speech, ask. And whatever happens, happens. First, I'm just going to give you the question, and then I'll shut up and let you just sit with it for a little bit. Feel free to answer. Feel free to witness some kind of verbal answer that arises. If so, ask the question again. If nothing comes, see what it is to rest in that edge, that margin of the question, the space left in its wake. And the question is, what is this? So take a few minutes to try this out, kind of keeping the breath going as the space or a stage for this, but not worrying too much about integrating everything. Just allowing the question to arise, maybe wait a spell, do it again for the next few minutes. If you're stumbling over the question of what this is exactly, well, that's your probe. It can be this moment, it can be this experience, it can be the situation, this perception. But all of these boil down to this more basic query. So make it concrete enough that it has some meaning, but also allow it to open beyond the concrete. Ask the question one more time. And now reflect, where in your body and mind did that question take place? For many of us, we have our inner speech sort of associated with our skull, behind our eyes, maybe a little closer to the throat. Maybe that was your experience, maybe not. But we're going to do another round of the same question, but this time really allow your attention, your presence to melt down your body and inhabit that center that we were building up with breath and attention. So ask the question from your belly and see if there's a shift. Throw yourself into the question. Sometimes it's useful to think of the breath as a kind of bellows. So there's a fire cooking in your belly. This fire is the question. Your breath is the bellows that is breathing that fire, enlivening that fire, but also compressing it, but concentrating the question. What is this happening right now? This might be an unsettling way to sit. If so, just note it. You may also notice that a kind of calm and spaciousness can emerge around the question. Just notice that too. Now we can practice with refocusing that energy around the belly, around the dantian, and either using our imagination to imagine the energy rising, or the flames to grow higher and higher, or almost to kind of consciously, energetically refocus our vibrant attention and bring it up to the heart. Take as long as you need. It might help to slightly squeeze the perineum, sort of invite your energy to rise. It might help to reestablish the openness of the heart and the roll back of the shoulders ever so slightly that we did initially, to remind your body, yourself, your mind, your spirit that the heart is open. And this is where our attention is gathering. Our heart is another swirling stage for a question. But this question is, who am I? And when you ask it, the I that is asking the question is the object of the question. It's not, who am I? Oh, I'm this person. I had this experience. Right now, sitting, awake, confused, excited, blissed out, annoyed. That is the I that I am wondering who is, or what is, if that falls better. So sit with that for a few minutes. Again, allow it to rise however frequently. If answers come, great. If nothing comes, great. But drill down into the question and enliven it with recognizing that it's this I right now that is the question. If it gets a little wiggy, a little unsettling, sometimes you get kind of in these loops or cracks of subjectivity. That's why we're in the heart. And then just feel that energy and feel that familiar sweetness of the heart as the stage or the ambiance of this question. You might even feel the question sort of floating up into your head again, and invite it back down. Allow the heart to ask the question. See if you can feel an answer. A response, perhaps, is a better word. Now you can let the questions aside and just rest in whatever space remains. Heart-centered, whole body-centered. No need to do anything. Or maybe you feel your who you are-ness in a different way. And just be with that. All right, let's end the meditation there. Please stretch or yawn or whatever you need. And yeah. Earlier, Chris Mays did a little bit of sleuthing on the age of this thing. We got a December 18th. Yeah, early January 19. Okay, so 3 years-ish. Great. Well, good to see everybody. I thought of one thing also I just wanted to mention that relates a little bit to the practice we're doing, although in an interpersonal way, is another practice that some people call inquiry, which is used for different types of practices, is something that I first discovered in the Diamond Heart approach, but it's also a technique used in Gestalt training, which is where you're with a partner and you're just sitting there looking at each other, and the one person is the questioner, and it's just, any number of questions, but it could be, who am I? And then you answer, and then the questioner's job is to just listen, not react, and then just pose the question again. So it's like you externalize that process. And it's very interesting because that's like an existential question, but it can also be, what do you want? Or what do you want out of your job? And you really answer the question, well, I want some satisfaction. Great. What do you want out of your job? Well, I want some money. Great. What do you want out of your job? And so you can see that it can take very trivial, or not trivial, but concrete questions. And you kind of like go through all the motions of what you think you want. And then there you are with like, well, what do you want? And so it's a really powerful practice. And that's another thing that's called inquiry, that particular sort of back and forth. And in a way, that's kind of what we're doing. We're just internalizing it. And we're allowing ourselves to be both the questioner and the answerer. Although in the kind of practice that we did, it strikes me that it's usually not, if you're coming up with verbal answers, that's great, go for it. But in general, we're sort of encouraging a more existential, phenomenological encounter with the question and its implications. But the verbal one is great too. Just like I was saying, it's questioning runs through the whole thing. It's what you should be doing with the teacher. One of my favorite spiritual books is I Am That, which is talks with Nisargadatta, who was a non-dual teacher in India. He was a beedi roller, tobacco merchant. And there's a number of books out, but this one is really particularly special. Part of it is that he's got a really interesting personality, or like the personality of the answers is a little crotchety, a little amused, kind of scary sometimes, kind of sweet. I mean, he's a very interesting tenor that's so different than most contemporary spiritual teachers. It's really nice to read it, although you probably are happy it's in a book. You're not there. I mean, it'd be awesome to be there too, but definitely a powerful dude. But the reason that I'm that is one of my favorite of these books. This is a lot of great books with great teachers in it. Is that the questioner is awesome. I think he's this Italian guy, and he's very wise and experienced, but he throws himself into the questions, and they're like not taking any bullshit. Like he's like, whatever. Yeah, you said that. What about this? And he'll reflect on his own experience. Like, oh, it feels like I've had all these experiences, but I realize they're bullshit. What do I do with that? It's like this real, like really putting yourself into the question and not holding back and not hiding in the kind of intellectuality of questioning at all. And he's very articulate and very vulnerable while also being very experienced. Like you're like, this guy's already had like way more experiences than I'm ever going to have, and he's still unsatisfied. And so you get this just marvel of questioning alongside this marvel of answering it. So yeah, there's a link in the chat if you want to check out that book. And it's also easy to read little chunks of it. It's divided up really well. It's a good mind blower. It's one that has been with me for a lot of the ride. I think it's a good one to deepen your questioning. And there's certain teachers that this kind of approach feed better, or they resonate more with this kind of approach, where they're not giving you necessarily a lot of handholds. And so some, teachings that are a little bit sterner or even more crazy wisdom kind of make sense when you're approaching it from this path of questioning, because in a way, if the teacher's giving you like a nice comfy carpet on the hard floor to sit on as you ask the question, you're not really getting to the question. But of course it can be distressing as well. It's definitely like drugs. it's a kind of pharmacon. It's a kind of thing that whether it's a positive dose or a poison depends on the amount. It's all about dosage. Like skepticism is very much a dosage condition. If you just for yourself, let alone the kinds of challenges teachers can have, but just for yourself, if you're too much of it, you can become embittered and cut off from possibility. You're so good at finding the crack or the gap or the inconsistency or the problem. So it's very much a dosage related thing, like so many things in spirituality.